Hello, and welcome back to Zenin Fanfics. Today we're starting an exciting new series. What if Deku had Mimic Mastery Quirk? If you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe for more content. The story we're featuring is written by AceFroster on Wattpad. You can find all the relevant links in the description, so be sure to check out the author's profile and say hello. Now, let's dive into the story. In this world, power wasn't just a dream or something you read about in fairy tales. It was real. Power was woven into everyday life, a part of the world everyone had grown used to. About 80% of the population was born with what people called a quirk, a unique ability that ranged from the simple to the extraordinary. These quirks had completely changed society. Heroes and villains were everywhere, their battles shaping the world around them, altering cities, influencing governments, and inspiring the hearts and minds of children everywhere. In this new world, being strong wasn't about how rich you were or where you came from. It was about the quirk you were born with and what you could do with it. Schools were built to train kids with quirks. Hero agencies flourished, and jobs were created around these powers. For most children, becoming a hero was the dream they held onto from the moment they first saw one in action. They wanted to save people, to be symbols of hope, just like the greatest hero of All Might, the symbol of peace. But then there were people like me, people who had a more difficult path to walk. 4-year-old Izuku Midoriya sat on the floor of his room, legs crossed, eyes wide as he watched the TV. On the screen, All Might was fighting bad guys, soaring through the air, his fists landing blow after blow, all while keeping that confident, reassuring smile on his face. To Izuku, All Might wasn't just a hero. He was hope itself. That's going to be me someday, Izuku thought, lost in a daydream. He imagined himself standing in All Might's shoes, saving people, just like the hero he admired so much. As the video ended, Izuku let out a breath he didn't even realize he was holding. His heart pounded with excitement, as it did every time he watched All Might. Energized, he jumped to his feet and ran out of his room, his little feet tapping against the floor. He hurried to the kitchen, where the smell of cooking greeted him. His mother, Inko Midoriya, was humming softly as she prepared dinner. Her quirk, telekinesis, was in action. A knife floated beside her, chopping vegetables, while bottles of oil and spices hovered in the air, pouring themselves into the pan with perfect timing. Izuku stopped in the doorway, eyes wide with admiration. His mother's quirk always fascinated him. To her, it was just something ordinary, something she did every day. But to Izuku, it was magical. He could watch her use it for hours. Suddenly, something strange happened. Izuku's pupils shifted slightly, a small change in their shape. He blinked, confused, and out of nowhere, a bright blue screen appeared in front of his eyes. System, would you like to copy the quirk? Telekinesis S+. Yes/no, Izuku gasped, his eyes widening in surprise. His little hands shook as he stared at the glowing words on the screen. He hadn't touched anything. The screen just appeared. Yes, he shouted excitedly, unable to hold back his joy. As soon as the word left his mouth, the screen vanished, disappearing as quickly as it had come. His mom turned around at the sound of his voice, startled. Izuku, you scared me, Inko said, her quirk slipping for just a moment, causing the floating vegetables to wobble in the air. But Izuku was too excited to notice. Mom, I unlocked my quirk. Inko smiled warmly and walked over to him, her face full of love and curiosity. You did. That's wonderful, sweetie. What kind of quirk do you have? Izuku pointed to the empty space where the blue screen had been moments before. Can't you see it? There was this blue screen floating in front of me. Inko blinked, clearly confused. A blue screen. I don't see anything, Izuku. Izuku frowned, but it was there. It asked if I wanted to copy your quirk, and I said yes. Inko knelt down beside him, still smiling, though she didn't quite understand what he was saying. Copy my quirk. That sounds interesting, sweetie, but quirks don't usually work that way. Izuku's eyes lit up with excitement. But mine does. I know it does. It said I could copy it. Inko chuckled softly, brushing his hair back. Well, if that's true, why don't you try using it? Izuku's heart swelled with pride at her words. He turned to the table, where a small apple sat. His mom always made it look so easy, using her telekinesis to move things. How hard could it be? He stretched out his hand toward the apple, his fingers trembling in concentration. But nothing happened. The apple didn't move. Izuku's brow furrowed, and he focused harder, imagining the apple floating just like when his mom did it. Still nothing. Frustration bubbled up inside him. Why isn't it working? He muttered, closing his eyes, trying as hard as he could to make the apple move. But the apple stayed put. Inko watched him, sensing his frustration. She gently placed her hand on his shoulder. Izuku, honey, maybe it just takes time to learn. You're still new at this. Izuku looked up at her, his face scrunched up in confusion. But I thought I copied it. Inko smiled kindly. Maybe it's a little more complicated than that. Don't worry, sweetie. You'll get it with practice. Izuku nodded, though he didn't quite understand. He was sure he had copied her quirk. Why hadn't it worked? As his mom turned back to cooking, Izuku stood there, scratching his head. What did I do wrong? He whispered. Determined to figure it out, Izuku called out again. Screen. But nothing happened. He tried again, louder this time. Quirk screen. Still nothing. Copy menu. Power thing. Blue thing. He cried out, but no matter what he called it, nothing appeared. Izuku's frustration grew. He was sure the blue screen had appeared earlier. Then, he remembered something. His eyes widened as the memory clicked in his mind. System, he whispered quietly, almost afraid it wouldn't work. Suddenly, the blue screen flashed in front of him again. His heart leaped in excitement as he saw the glowing letters appear once more. But now, there was more information on the screen than before. Status window. Izuku Midoriya Quirk. Mimic Mastery, SSS+, Proficiency, 100% description. The user can copy a quirk by watching it in action. The copied quirk starts at low skill, but improves with practice. Only one chance is given to copy each quirk. Failure to copy or choosing not to copy will result in losing the chance forever. Copied quirks. Telekinesis, S+, Proficiency, 0% description. The user can move objects with their mind. Requires focus. Skill improves with use. Izuku stared at the screen, scratching his head. He understood that his quirk was called Mimic Mastery, but some of the other words, like proficiency and practice, were unfamiliar. What's proficiency? He mumbled, feeling frustrated again. His stomach growled, reminding him that dinner was ready. He dismissed the screen for now and sat down at the table, where his mom had just placed a warm plate of food. As they ate, Izuku's mind was still stuck on the blue screen and the strange words. He picked at his food, lost in thought. Finally, he couldn't hold the question back any longer. Mom, he asked, looking up from his plate, what does proficiency mean? Inko blinked, surprised by the question. Proficiency. That's how good you are at something. The more you practice, the better your proficiency gets. Izuku's eyes lit up. Oh, and what's permanent loss? Inko raised an eyebrow, intrigued. That means once it's gone, you can never get it back. Why are you asking? Izuku hesitated, then said, it's just the blue screen. Had those words, but I didn't understand them. Inko smiled warmly. It sounds like your quirk is pretty special. Don't worry, Izuku. We'll figure it out together. Izuku nodded, feeling a little better. But as he finished dinner, his mind kept going back to the blue screen. His Mimic Mastery quirk was at 100%, but his skill with telekinesis was still at 0. He didn't know exactly what that meant yet, but he knew one thing for sure. He would need a lot of practice. From the moment Izuku discovered his quirk, Mimic Mastery, the world around him felt completely different, brighter, full of possibilities, and yet more complicated than ever. His quirk wasn't just any quirk. It gave him the power to copy others' abilities. He could take on the quirks of anyone he saw in action, but there was one catch. He had only one chance. If he failed to copy a quirk, or chose not to, the opportunity would slip away forever. That fact hung over him like a shadow, making every moment feel like a test. Every decision weighted with consequences. And for a 4-year-old, that was a lot to handle. The idea of copying the powers of great heroes like All Might or Endeavor thrilled him. He'd watch videos of them, imagining what it would be like to wield such immense strength or control over fire. But the pressure of making the right choice often left him overwhelmed. What if he missed a quirk that could help him become a hero? What if he chose wrong? 2 months had passed since he copied his mother's telekinesis quirk. At first, he was overjoyed at the idea of being able to lift things with his mind. It sounded amazing, but training turned out to be far more difficult than he had anticipated. Izuku stood in the middle of the living room, his face scrunched in deep concentration. In front of him sat a small, innocent-looking apple. He stretched his hand out towards it, fingers trembling as if he could somehow will the fruit to float. "Come on, move," he muttered under his breath. The apple, stubborn and still, refused to budge. From the kitchen, his mom, Inko, glanced over and saw his struggle. She was using her own telekinesis to make dinner, vegetables, and kitchen utensils floating effortlessly through the air. She smiled softly at her son's determination. "Izuku, honey, it's okay," she said kindly. "It took me a while to learn control, too. Just keep practicing." Izuku gave her a quick nod, though frustration churned in his chest. "But I didn't have to learn it. He had copied it. Shouldn't that make things easier?" He let out a deep sigh, his hand dropping to his side. The apple remained unmoved. Weeks passed, and despite his frustrations, Izuku trained every day. Little by little, he could see small improvements. He began with objects like a pencil or his toy cars, focusing HRD on moving even the tiniest things. After 2 long weeks, something finally clicked. It was a rainy afternoon when it happened. Izuku sat on the floor of his room, his gaze locked on a small red toy car in front of him. For the 100th time, he tried to lift it, his fingers tingling with concentration. Then, to his shock, the car wobbled. His breath caught in his throat. The car lifted off the ground, just for a second, before falling back down with a soft clatter. Yes! Izuku jumped to his feet, fists in the air. It moved. It really moved. His mom poked her head into the room, her smile lighting up with pride. "I knew you could do it, sweetie." A quick glance at his proficiency meter revealed a tiny jump. 1%. It wasn't much, but it was a start. By the 3rd week, Izuku's control had improved enough that he could lift small objects like books and cups with relative ease. His proficiency with telekinesis crept up to 1%, and while it wasn't a lot, it felt like progress. The practice sessions became longer and more intense as he pushed his limits, trying to lift heavier objects. One day, standing in the backyard, Izuku faced a medium-sized rock. He had been trying to lift it for 3 days, but today, something felt different. He stretched his hand toward the stone, focusing on that familiar, tingling sensation. Slowly, the rock began to lift off the ground. First a foot, then 2, until it hovered in the air. Izuku grinned through the effort, sweat trickling down his forehead. With one last push, he sent the rock soaring another foot before it crashed back to the ground. "Yes," he shouted, collapsing into the grass, exhausted but triumphant. His proficiency had jumped to 2%. 2 months later, 2 months into his training, Izuku's proficiency had grown to 3%. It wasn't much compared to the vast potential of his quirk, but he could now lift heavier objects like chairs, boxes, and even the sofa on a good day, though it took considerable effort. After an intense training session one afternoon, Izuku fell back onto the couch, completely spent. He had spent hours moving the dining table back and forth, testing the limits of his control. His body and mind ached, but the satisfaction of his progress made the strain worth it. Needing a break, Izuku grabbed his laptop and opened it to HeroTube, his go-to for entertainment and inspiration. Scrolling through the feed, he watched videos of heroes showing off their flashy quirks. Flames, ice explosions. He'd seen them all before. And then, something different caught his eye. The title of the video read, "Enhanced Intellect. How this quirk makes you a genius." Izuku clicked on the video out of curiosity. The screen filled with a man in a lab coat, standing in front of a chalkboard filled with complex equations. He was explaining how his quirk, Enhanced Intellect, allowed him to solve problems faster, process information at an incredible speed, and retain knowledge better than anyone else. Izuku's interest peaked. The man worked through difficult math problems with ease, and at first, Izuku thought the quirk seemed useful, but soon, the video began to drag. While the quirk was impressive, it wasn't exciting. There were no flashy explosions or powerful attacks, just fast thinking. Then, out of nowhere, the familiar blue screen flashed before his eyes. System, would you like to copy the quirk? Enhanced intellect, C. Yes/no. Izuku stared at the words, eyes wide. It was the first time the system had given him the choice to copy someone's quirk in real time, and it caught him off guard. Whoa, he whispered, heart racing. The offer sat before him, the two options clear as day, yes or no. He chewed his lip, deep in thought. Do I really want this quirk? Sure, being smarter would be useful, but would it help him become the kind of hero he dreamed of being? Heroes like All Might and Endeavor didn't rely on intelligence. They relied on strength and raw power. After a long moment, Izuku sighed and said softly, no. The screen blinked, and the option disappeared. Izuku sat back, staring at the screen, wondering if he had made the right choice. For the next few minutes, Izuku scrolled through video after video, searching for something more exciting. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but deep down, he wanted a quirk with real impact. Then, a new video caught his eye, an interview with Endeavor titled, Hellflame Quirk Explained. Izuku clicked immediately. The video opened with a dramatic flare, flames flickering across the screen, casting shadows in the shape of Endeavor's powerful silhouette. The number 2 hero stepped into the frame, his fiery eyes burning with intensity. My quirk is called Hellflame. Endeavor's deep voice rumbled. It allows me to generate and control flames hotter than anything found in nature. Control is key. Push too hard, and it burns out of control. But MSTR it, and it becomes unstoppable. Izuku's heart raced as the screen flashed before him again. System, would you like to copy the quirk? Hellflame, S. Yes/no. Izuku stared at the option, his pulse pounding in his ears. Hellflame. This was a chance to wield real power, power like Endeavor's. But was he ready for it? Could he handle such a dangerous quirk? The weight of the decision settled over him. He knew this could change everything. With a deep breath, Izuku made his choice. Status window. Izuku Midoriya Quirk. Mimic Mastery, SSS+, Proficiency, 100% description. Allows Izuku to copy any quirk he observes. Copied quirks start with minimal proficiency and must be trained to increase effectiveness. He can store multiple quirks and SWCH between them at will. Copied quirks, telekinesis, S+, proficiency, 3% description, grants the ability to move objects with mental focus. Currently able to lift moderate weight objects. Higher proficiency will allow control over heavier objects and more complex movements. Hellflame, S, proficiency, 0% description, allows Izuku to generate and manipulate flames of extreme heat, currently capable of brief bursts of heat. As proficiency increases, so will control and intensity. Izuku had already made his choice. Weeks ago, when the system presented him with the opportunity to copy Hellflame after watching Endeavor's interview, he didn't hesitate. The chance to wield such an incredible quirk was something he couldn't pass up. But now, after 2 months of relentless training, Izuku was beginning to understand the true weight of that decision. Hellflame, S proficiency 3% telekinesis, S plus proficiency 4. 5% the numbers from the system screen were a constant reminder of how much work he still had ahead of him. The flames were there, deep within him, but every time he tried to call them forth, they remained just out of control, fierce, wild, and unyielding. In the early days of his training, he could barely summon a spark without getting overwhelmed by the heat. Now, though, the flames came easier. He could at least produce them on command, even if they only lasted for a few seconds before flickering out. Standing in the backyard, Izuku wiped the sweat from his brow and clenched his fists, focusing all his willpower into his hands. Slowly, flames began to flicker to life in his palms. They danced and crackled with energy, a wild orange glow reflecting in his green eyes. For a brief moment, Izuku felt a surge of triumph. He had held the fire for longer than usual. Then, just as quickly as they had appeared, the flames vanished. Ugh, seriously. Izuku groaned, his hands dropping to his sides. He fell back on the grass, staring up at the sky. The blue screen hovered in front of him, showing the same discouraging number, 3%. After 2 months of training, that was all he had managed to achieve. Progress was slow, painfully slow. He had expected to be much further along by now. But hellflame wasn't like his mom's telekinesis. It was unpredictable, dangerous, and difficult to control. With telekinesis, everything had felt smooth and gradual. He could visualize what he wanted to move, and it happened. But fire didn't listen the same way. Focus, Izuku. Focus, he muttered to himself, sitting back up. He brought his hands together, summoning the heat once more. This time, the fire sparked to life faster, burning brightly in his palms. The heat was intense, making him sweat, but he tried to hold the flames steady, breathing deeply to maintain control. For a moment, it seemed to work. The flames flickered and held steady for several seconds longer than before. But soon, the heat became too much, and the fire sputtered out, leaving behind only a faint wisp of smoke. Izuku groaned in frustration, collapsing back onto the ground again. He stared up at the sky, catching his breath, his body drenched in sweat. The fire within him burned fiercely, but it was clear he wasn't ready to handle it just yet. The next few weeks passed in a blur of training sessions and frustration. Izuku spent every free moment he had trying to increase his proficiency with hellflame, pushing himself harder with each session. Every time he thought he was making progress, the flames would flare out of control, or worse, refuse to ignite at all. Despite the slow progress, he refused to give up. There were moments, fleeting but real, when the fire obeyed him, when the flames danced to his will. But those moments were rare, and they left him hungry for more. His evenings were always the same. He'd sneak out to the backyard after dinner, making sure his mom didn't notice, and practice for hours on end. Each night, he came back inside exhausted, but a little more determined. His body ached from the strain of the training, and his mind was constantly preoccupied with thoughts of how he could push himself further. However, Izuku hadn't neglected his telekinesis during these weeks. While his focus had shifted to hellflame, he still practiced moving objects whenever he had the chance. At first, it was just small things, pencils, cups, even books. Gradually, though, his proficiency with the quirk began to improve. He could now lift multiple items at once without breaking concentration. The system reflected that progress, showing a slight increase in his proficiency level. It wasn't as rapid as before, but it was still something. Telekinesis, S+ proficiency 4. 5%. Izuku felt proud of his improvement, though he knew there was still a long way to go. Come on, Izuku muttered one evening, standing in the center of the yard with his hands outstretched. The air around him shimmered with heat as flames sparked to life in his palms. This time, the fire was stronger than before, burning brighter, hotter. Izuku gritted his teeth, focusing all his energy on maintaining control. His hands trembled as the flames crackled, but he forced himself to hold on, to keep the fire steady. Seconds ticked by, and the flames continued to burn. Yes, he whispered, excitement bubbling up inside him. But just as he thought he was finally getting the hang of it, the fire roared to life, growing too fast for him to control. In an instant, the flames surged upward, licking at the air wildly. Panic surged through Izuku as he tried to pull the fire back, but it was no use. The flames had already spiraled out of control. The heat intensified, making his skin prickle with discomfort, and the fire flared dangerously close to the wooden fence in the backyard. Izuku's heart pounded in his chest as he realized he was about to burn down the yard. No, he shouted, waving his arms frantically in a futile attempt to stop the flames. Suddenly, without thinking, he reached out with his telekinesis, the first quirk he'd ever copied. The flames wavered for a moment, as if caught in an invisible grip, before they were yanked backward, disappearing in an instant. Izuku stumbled back, panting, his heart racing. He blinked, staring at his hands, half expecting the fire to reignite. But it didn't. Izuku let out a long, shaky breath. He had just barely managed to stop the flames from spreading. But he had done it with his telekinesis. Maybe that was the key. Maybe combining his quirks would give him better control over them. Izuku glanced up at the blue screen, still floating in front of him, showing the small increase in his proficiency levels. He felt a surge of determination. He wasn't going to let the fire beat him. He just needed more time, more practice, and maybe, just maybe, he was on the verge of figuring out how to truly MSTR the flames. Status update. Mimic Mastery, SSS, plus proficiency 100% hellflame. S proficiency 3% telekinesis. S plus proficiency 4. 5% Izuku's routine was nothing short of relentless. For the past few months, every day followed the same pattern. School, home, train, and repeat. While other kids at kindergarten laughed and played, Izuku's mind was always elsewhere. The other kids would sometimes point out how quiet he had become, but he didn't care. They wouldn't understand. Not yet. At school, he did what was expected, sat quietly, followed the rules, but his real focus began the moment the bell rang for dismissal. When other children went home to watch cartoons or play games, Izuku would run straight to his room, throw down his backpack, and head outside. In the backyard, away from prying eyes, his training began. Every day, he pushed the limits of his telekinesis quirk. His progress had been steady. He could now lift several objects at once without breaking a sweat. The small weights his mom used for yoga would float effortlessly before him, the combined mass barely a challenge. A few months ago, even a simple chair had been a struggle. Now he could lift furniture, crates, even bags of cement his mom had left out for gardening. Yet, it wasn't enough. He knew it could be better. His proficiency had climbed slowly, barely reaching 5% after all his efforts. Come on, more. He would grunt, straining to lift multiple heavy objects simultaneously. Sweat dripped from his brow as he concentrated, pushing his telekinesis further, even when his body wanted to quit. Then there was hellflame. That quirk, though powerful, had been even more difficult to MSTR. Controlling fire was different from moving objects with his mind. The flames responded to emotion, to instinct. If Izuku got too excited, they'd burn too hot, too wild, too fast. He had to stay calm, focused. A few times, his mom had asked him why the backyard smelled like something was burning. He had brushed it off, claiming it must be the neighbors. In truth, it was his training. His hellflame proficiency had risen to 6%, but every step forward had come with a lot of effort. He could now create a stable flame, a controlled stream that burned bright and hot without scorching the surroundings. Still, there was more he needed to unlock. He could feel it. One day, after an exhausting afternoon of training, Izuku collapsed on his bed, tired and frustrated. He grabbed his laptop and began scrolling through HeroTube, hoping to find something that might inspire his next step. His fingers lazily clicked through videos, some clips of pro heroes in action, others of quirk analysis. As he mindlessly clicked through the content, his eyes landed on a video that piqued his curiosity, unlocking potential with overdrive. The thumbnail showed a man surrounded by a strange red aura, veins bulging as his body glowed with power. Overdrive, Izuku muttered as he clicked play. The video opened with a man standing in a training area, his body covered in a pulsating red light. He began speaking, explaining how his quirk, overdrive, worked. It's simple, really. Overdrive pushes my body beyond its natural limits. It amps up my strength, my speed, even my endurance. But there's a catch. It's risky. The more I push, the more strain I put on my body. Too much, and I can burn out. Izuku's eyes widened. The man then demonstrated, his muscles bulging as his body surged forward, lifting an impossibly large weight and running at blinding speeds. But as the video continued, Izuku could see the toll it took. The man was sweating profusely, breathing hard, and eventually collapsed from exhaustion. As the video ended, A familiar blue screen appeared before Izuku's eyes. System, would you like to copy the quirk? Overdrive? A+. Yes/no. Izuku's breath hitched. The potential of this quirk was immense. It could push his body to its limits, make him faster, stronger, everything he wanted. But he knew the risks too. Could he handle it? Holy CRP, Izuku muttered, suddenly realizing how loud he had spoken. What was that, honey? His mom's voice called from the kitchen. Nothing, Mom, he shouted back, staring at the screen for a few more seconds. After a moment of hesitation, Izuku grinned. Yes, he whispered, and the blue screen disappeared. Over the next few days, Izuku began experimenting with overdrive. The power it gave him was unlike anything he had experienced before. The moment he activated it, his body surged with energy, his muscles felt stronger, his speed increased, but with that power came a price. The longer he used it, the more tired he became. At first, he could barely handle a minute of activation before his legs began to shake. But Izuku was determined. Every day after school, he'd train, using overdrive in short bursts, timing himself, pushing his limits little by little. His proficiency rose quicker than with hellflame or telekinesis, and within weeks, he had reached 2%. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep him moving forward. One evening, as Izuku trained in his backyard, he had a wild idea. What if overdrive could amplify his other quirks? After all, it boosted his physical abilities. Maybe it could enhance more than just his body. Excited by the thought, Izuku activated overdrive and focused on hellflame. The flames sputtered to life, flickering in his hands, but this time, something was different. The flames burned brighter, hotter, stronger than before. He could feel the surge of power flowing into his quirk, pushing it beyond its normal limits. A grin spread across his face. It works. Status window, Izuku, Midoriya quirk. Mimic Mastery SSS plus proficiency. 100% allows Izuku to copy quirks by observing them in use. The effectiveness of the copied quirk depends on Izuku's proficiency with it. Quirk, Hellflame S proficiency, 6%. Allows Izuku to generate intense flames that can be manipulated and controlled. The flames increase in power and intensity as proficiency rises. Quirk, Telekinesis S plus proficiency, 5%. Allows Izuku to lift and manipulate objects with his mind. The weight and number of objects he can control increase with proficiency. Quirk, Overdrive A plus proficiency, 2%. Boosts Izuku's physical abilities, including strength, speed, and endurance. The more he pushes, the greater the strain on his body. Izuku stared at the screen in awe. His progress was slow but steady. He couldn't wait to see just how far he could push his quirks with overdrive. The small park behind Izuku's apartment had become his sanctuary. It was the perfect spot to train away from prying eyes. Just a few trees, a swing set, and an old slide, enough to keep him hidden while pushing himself with his quirks. Today, like many other days, Izuku was working on his overdrive. He stood in the middle of the park, his face set in concentration. His body surged with energy as he practiced kicks and punches, each motion faster and stronger than the last. He could feel the power, the intensity building within him, and he was getting better at controlling it. His overdrive quirk had grown to 5%, and it was catching up to his other abilities, though still not at the level of telekinesis and hellflame. Izuku stopped for a moment, panting. He wiped the sweat from his brow and flicked the moisture off his hand. He was about to SWCH to telekinesis training when he heard a voice from behind. Him. Hey, what are you doing? Izuku flinched, quickly turning off overdrive before anyone could notice. He turned around and saw a boy about his age walking toward him. The boy had dark hair and piercing blue eyes, with an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. He wore a grin that suggested he wasn't easily impressed. I've never seen you around here, the boy said, folding his arms as he stopped in front of Izuku. I'm Kaido. What quirk were you just using? Izuku felt his heart race. He hadn't been seen using overdrive, thankfully, but now he had to be careful. He couldn't let anyone know he had multiple quirks. Not yet. Just my telekinesis, Izuku said with a small smile. trying to seem casual. Kaido raised an eyebrow, clearly not convinced, but not pressing the issue. Telekinesis, huh? That's cool, I guess. Kaido turned and looked around, almost as if he was searching for something more interesting. Then, he looked back at Izuku with a smirk. But I bet my quirk's better. Izuku blinked, unsure whether Kaido was teasing him or serious. Oh, what's your quirk? Kaido didn't need to be asked twice. He stepped back, spreading his feet as if preparing for a demonstration. The air around him shifted, and Izuku felt a strange pressure settle over him. Kaido raised his hand, and suddenly, the gravity in the area around him intensified. The ground cracked slightly beneath his feet, and a small rock nearby floated up into the air, defying gravity. Then, just as suddenly, Kaido released the pressure, and everything returned to normal. It's called gravity manipulation, Kaido said, grinning proudly. I can control the gravity around me. Make things heavier, lighter, even make myself fly, if I practice enough. What do you think of that? Izuku's eyes widened. That was an impressive quirk for someone their age, and it immediately caught his attention. Gravity manipulation was advanced for a kid, and Kaido seemed pretty skilled with it, even if he still had a lot to learn. Without thinking, Izuku's mind wandered to the possibilities, and suddenly, a familiar blue screen appeared in front of him. Would you like to copy the quirk, gravity manipulation? Yes/no. Izuku's heart skipped a beat. The opportunity to copy Kaido's quirk was right there. He stared at the screen, frozen for a moment, wondering if he should do it. He had been careful with choosing which quirks to copy, but this one felt different. Gravity manipulation could be incredibly powerful if used right, especially when combined with his other quirks. Before Kaido could notice anything strange, Izuku mentally said, yes. The screen disappeared, and Izuku felt a slight tingling sensation in his body, a familiar feeling whenever he copied a new quirk. But he kept his expression neutral, trying not to show that anything had happened. That's really cool, Izuku said genuinely. I've never seen anything like it. Kaido grinned wider, clearly pleased with the praise. Yeah, it's pretty awesome, but it's hard to control sometimes. I still need a lot of practice to get it perfect. Izuku nodded. I get it. I'm still trying to get better with telekinesis too. Training is hard. For a moment, there was a pause between them. Kaido seemed to size Izuku up, and Izuku, now aware that Kaido could be a rival, was doing the same. But despite Kaido's arrogant front, Izuku could sense that he wasn't a bad guy. He was just confident in his abilities, maybe even a little competitive. You come here to train a lot? Kaido asked, glancing around the park. Yeah, Izuku replied. I live in the apartment nearby, and it's a good place to practice without too many people around. Kaido's eyes lit up. Then how about we train together sometime? We can see whose quirk is stronger. Izuku smiled, feeling a strange sense of excitement. Sure, I'd like that. As Kaido turned to leave, Izuku suddenly remembered something. He couldn't let anyone else know about his multiple quirks. It was too risky, especially since most people only had one. If word got out that he could copy quirks, it might cause problems. Hey, Kaido, Izuku called out. Kaido paused and looked back over his shoulder. Yeah, can you keep this training thing between us? I'd rather not have too many people know about it. Kaido gave him a curious look, but shrugged. Sure, whatever. It's not like I need to tell anyone. Izuku nodded, relieved. Thanks. With that, Kaido walked off, leaving Izuku alone in the park. Izuku let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. That had been close. But now, with gravity manipulation in his arsenal, he had another powerful tool at his disposal. It was still new to him, but he was sure he could figure out how to use it with time and practice. Looking at his hands, Izuku couldn't help but smile. Things were getting more interesting. After weeks of training together, the sun once again bathed the small park behind Izuku's apartment. Kaido stood with his arms crossed, watching as Izuku floated a soccer ball in the air using his telekinesis. Izuku was becoming increasingly adept with his quirk, the ball smoothly hovering up and down at his command. Telekinesis wasn't his strongest quirk, but with weeks of practice, he'd managed to keep it at par with the others. Izuku, you're getting better, Kaido said, his voice still carrying that hint of arrogance that Izuku had grown used to. He'd figured out Kaido wasn't a bad guy, just a bit too proud of his quirk. Izuku smiled, the praise feeling genuine, though he still didn't let on that telekinesis was far from his only ability. He was keeping his secret close, as planned. Kaido's own quirk, gravity manipulation, was advanced for his age. His control over it had made him stand out to everyone in kindergarten. While Kaido often showed off by floating himself above the ground or using gravity to make his punches stronger, Izuku had secretly been working to catch up with him. Over the last few weeks, Izuku had watched Kaido manipulate gravity with expert precision. Now, after secretly copying the quirk during one of their earlier encounters, Izuku had been practicing the same moves. He was careful never to reveal too much, always stopping short of showing his full range of abilities. But today, as they trained, something clicked. As Kaido made himself float in the air, lifting off effortlessly, Izuku stood still, watching him intently. He had mimicked this before, but only in private. He flexed his fingers, the familiar energy of gravity manipulation humming beneath his skin. Without a word, Izuku leapt into the air, concentrating on the quirk. He felt the gravity around him shift, the pressure lifting him higher. For a moment, he wobbled, the sensation still new, but then he balanced himself mid-air, rising up to Kaido's level. Kaido turned and blinked. "What the? Izuku, you're flying." Izuku smiled sheepishly. Yeah, I guess I am." He floated there for a second longer before landing, dusting off his clothes like it was no big deal. Inside, though, he was thrilled. His proficiency with gravity manipulation had been slowly rising, and now he could do some of the basic things Kaido could do. Kaido landed too, eyeing him suspiciously. "That's some strong telekinesis you've got there. Didn't know it could do that." Izuku swallowed hard. "Yeah, be careful here." "Why, yeah, I've been practicing a lot," he mumbled, scratching the back of his head. Kaido didn't seem convinced, but he didn't press further either. Instead, he crossed his arms again, smirking. "Well, let's see if you can handle this." Kaido focused, lifting a nearby park bench with his gravity. He then slammed it back down, sending vibrations through the ground. "Try doing that." Izuku hesitated for a moment. He wasn't sure if he could match that much force yet. But then again, he hadn't tested the full extent of gravity manipulation. Focusing on the bench, Izuku felt the familiar pull of the quirk. He clenched his fists, concentrating hard as he imagined increasing the gravity around the bench. It began to rise, slowly at first, before Izuku pulled it up completely, hovering in mid-air. With a quick flick of his wrist, he brought it down harder than Kaido had, making the ground tremble even more. Kaido's eyes widened, and for a moment, he looked almost impressed. Then his usual smirk returned. "Not bad. Not bad at all." Izuku laughed nervously, wiping the sweat from his forehead. He hadn't expected to pull that off so easily. It seemed his training was paying off, but gravity manipulation still felt raw, less refined compared to telekinesis or hellflame. The afternoon passed with the two boys practicing and competing with each other. Kaido continued to show off the finer points of gravity manipulation, while Izuku played along, mimicking his techniques, always holding back just enough to avoid suspicion. His overdrive quirk had been progressing too, though not as quickly as telekinesis or hellflame. But he was starting to understand the full scope of what he could do with gravity manipulation. By the time the sun began to set, both boys were exhausted. Kaido stretched his arms and yawned, ready to head home. "Same time tomorrow." "Yeah." Izuku nodded. "Same time." As Kaido walked away, Izuku stayed behind for a few minutes, his mind racing. He called up the familiar blue screen of his system, his eyes scanning the updated information. Status window quirk. Mimic Mastery, SSS+, Proficiency. 100% a quirk that allows the user to copy another person's quirk after observing it in use. The user can only copy a quirk once and must decide in the moment whether to accept or reject it. Quirk, Telekinesis, S+, Proficiency. 9% allows the user to manipulate objects through sheer force of will. Current proficiency enables lifting objects like boxes, chairs, and medium-sized furniture with more consistent control. Quirk, hellflame, S, proficiency. 9% allows the user to produce and manipulate intensely hot flames. Current proficiency enables Izuku to generate fire strong enough to melt metal with better precision and control. Quirk, overdrive, A+, proficiency. 6% temporarily boosts physical attributes and amplifies the effects of other quirks at the cost of severe physical strain. The user can enhance their abilities by multiple times, though prolonged use is dangerous. Quirk, gravity manipulation, A, proficiency. 3% allows the user to alter gravitational forces in their vicinity, enabling them to increase or decrease the weight of objects and individuals. This quirk can be used to enhance physical abilities, create powerful gravitational fields, or immobilize opponents. Izuku stared at the screen for a while, feeling a mixture of pride and frustration. His progress with overdrive was catching up, but gravity manipulation still needed a lot of work. Kaido still had a noticeable advantage on him with that quirk, but Izuku was determined to close the gap. He closed the system, watching the last sliver of sunlight disappear behind the horizon. There was so much left to learn, but he could feel it. He was getting stronger, faster, and one day, soon, he would surpass everyone. With a final deep breath, Izuku headed home, his mind already planning tomorrow's training session. 8 years had passed since Izuku discovered his ability to copy quirks. What began as an overwhelming power had gradually become a part of him, shaping his growth in secret. Now, at 12 years old, Izuku stood at the entrance of Shiketsu Junior High, taking in the sight of his classmates, all of whom thought they knew who he was. But they didn't. They had no idea what he was truly capable of. To the public, Izuku was known for one quirk, telekinesis. His registration form listed it as his sole ability. But the reality was far more complex. Over the years, Izuku had copied quirks without revealing them to anyone. He had grown stronger, training in secret after school, pushing his limits while ensuring no one discovered his true power. His days had settled into a routine. School, training, more training, and analyzing quirks on HeroTube, looking for any ability that caught his attention. But with Kaido as his rival, it wasn't as easy to keep things under wraps. Kaido was strong, no doubt about it. His gravity manipulation quirk had developed an impressive rate. By now, he could lift himself into the air effortlessly, create small-scale gravity fields to push or pull objects around him, and even strengthen his punches by increasing the weight behind his fists. Izuku admired Kaido's determination, but deep down, he knew his own potential was greater. Much greater. Despite this, their rivalry had remained one-sided. Kaido was unaware that he was competing against someone with more than just telekinesis. Izuku had kept his other quirks, hellflame, overdrive, gravity manipulation, and most recently, infinite regeneration, hidden from everyone. It was a warm, sunny afternoon, and Izuku and Kaido were hanging out in the park near Izuku's apartment. Their training session had wrapped up, and they were cooling down from an intense sparring match. Kaido, breathing heavily but grinning, brushed a hand through his hair. "Man, I swear you're getting faster with that telekinesis of yours. What are you doing?" "Secret training." Izuku smiled, brushing off the comment with a shrug. "Just practicing whenever I can. You know how it is." He didn't dare tell Kaido the truth, that his overdrive quirk was making everything grow faster. When Izuku had first copied overdrive, it seemed like a quirk that simply boosted his physical capabilities. But after months of testing, he had discovered its hidden power. Whenever he used overdrive in conjunction with one of his other quirks, the proficiency of both quirks increased at a faster rate than normal. At first, Izuku hadn't noticed the connection, but as his training progressed, the evidence became too obvious to ignore. Stacking overdrive with his hellflame or telekinesis allowed him to push his limits far beyond what should have been possible. However, it was risky. Overdrive strained his body every time he pushed it too far, and while it did help his quirks grow, The pain that followed was intense. Izuku had only recently started stacking overdrive several times in a row, reaching levels that made him wonder how far he could go. 5 or 6 stacks seemed to accelerate his growth, but at the cost of intense fatigue. "How about you?" Izuku asked, changing the subject. "Your gravity stuff is getting pretty crazy. That field you made earlier, I could barely move." Kaido smirked, rolling his shoulders. "Yeah, well, I've been working on it. It's still not perfect, though. I can only hold the field for a few seconds before it collapses. But I'm getting there." Izuku watched as Kaido absent-mindedly lifted a few small rocks from the ground, twirling them around in a mini-gravity field. It was impressive. Kaido had refined his quirk to the point where he could control multiple objects at once, and his precision had grown exponentially. Izuku could do the same, of course. He had copied gravity manipulation after watching Kaido use it enough times. But Kaido didn't know that. Later that evening, Izuku sat in his room, staring at the blue screen that had become a regular part of his life. His system was displaying his progress, and Izuku couldn't help but smile. Status window telekinesis, S+, proficiency, 18% hellflame, S, proficiency, 18% overdrive, A+, proficiency, 15% gravity manipulation, A, proficiency, 9% infinite regeneration, SS+, proficiency. 5% he had worked hard over the years, splitting his focus between these quirks while trying to keep his true power a secret. But as the years went by, it was becoming harder to hide the fact that his abilities were growing rapidly. Izuku had copied infinite regeneration a few months ago after watching a top hero from Germany on live TV. The hero's ability to heal from any injury was remarkable, and now Izuku had that same power. He had used it several times already, testing its limits, though no one had noticed his remarkable healing. Infinite regeneration had given him the confidence to push his limits even more. Now, with overdrive boosting his quirks, he could train harder without worrying about permanent damage. His body would heal as long as even a drop of BLD remained. But the secret of his multiple quirks was becoming harder to manage. With his quirks growing at such a rapid pace, Izuku knew that someday someone would notice. Until then, he would continue to train in secret, pushing himself further each day. The next day, Kaido and Izuku met up at the park again, ready for another round of sparring. As always, they pushed each other to their limits. Kaido's arrogance still shone through, but Izuku had grown used to it. Underneath that cocky exterior, Kaido was a hard worker, and Izuku respected him for that. "Hey," Kaido said as they squared off again. "Let's see what you've got today, Midoriya. Maybe you'll finally give me a challenge." Izuku smirked, keeping his secrets close. Telekinesis was all Kaido would ever see, but it was more than enough for now. As they prepared to clash again, Izuku silently activated overdrive, feeling the familiar surge of power flood through his body. The early morning sun filtered softly through the curtains of Izuku's room, casting faint beams of light across the cluttered floor. He stood in front of his desk, staring at the calendar pinned on the wall. One particular date was circled in bright red marker: the UA entrance exam, now only 2 years away. Izuku sighed, his chest tightening with frustration. 2 years, he muttered to himself, shaking his head. He slumped into his chair, feeling the weight of the situation settle over him like a thick fog. "I only have 2 years left, and I'm not where I should be." For most students aiming for UA, 2 years was a long time. They had a single quirk to focus on, hone, and perfect. 2 years meant plenty of opportunity to MSTR that quirk, refine their abilities, and show up ready. But for Izuku, things were different. He wasn't like everyone else. He had 5 quirks to MSTR, and possibly more to come in the future. With so many abilities and so little time, even his 8 years of intense training didn't feel like enough. He had progressed, yes, but not at the pace that he needed to. "I'm falling behind," he said quietly, eyes narrowing. "If I keep this up, I won't be ready. I'll fall behind Kaido and everyone else in the UA exam." His mind raced as he thought about Kaido. His training partner was already mastering his gravity manipulation quirk, growing stronger and more skilled by the day. Izuku, despite his best efforts, wasn't keeping pace. "No," he said, standing up and clenching his fists. "I can't afford to waste any more time. Regular training isn't enough. I need to break my limits, push myself harder." Suddenly, his mother's voice drifted up the stairs, pulling him out of his thoughts. "Izuku, breakfast is ready." He blinked, momentarily forgetting about his worries. He glanced at the calendar one last time, his expression hardening with resolve. Then he hurried downstairs, where the smell of miso soup and rice filled the air. His mother, Inko, smiled at him as she set the food on the table. "Morning, sweetie. You've been looking really focused lately. Is everything okay?" Izuku forced a smile as he sat down. "Yeah, I'm fine, Mom. Just thinking about training. I don't have much time left." Inko's face softened. She knew how hard Izuku worked, how much pressure he put on himself. "You're going to do great, Izuku. You always push yourself so hard. I believe in you." He nodded, grateful for her support, but his mind was elsewhere, focused on his plan. He ate quickly, finishing his breakfast in record time before standing up abruptly. "Thanks, Mom. I'm heading out." Before Inko could respond, Izuku was already out the door, his mind set on one thing: training. The beach was filthy, covered in rusted car parts, refrigerators, and heaps of scrap metal that had been left to rot. Most people avoided the area, but for Izuku, it was perfect. He had trained here for years, hidden away from prying eyes, using the debris to sharpen his abilities. Izuku stood at the edge of the beach, surrounded by piles of junk, his heart pounding with anticipation. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what he was about to do. His regular training had gotten him this far, but now it was time to go beyond his limits. He couldn't afford to hold back any longer. "This is it," he whispered to himself. "I need to push myself further than I ever have before." Closing his eyes, he focused on his breathing. His body began to tense as he concentrated, channeling the energy of one of his quirks, overdrive. His hair stirred gently in the breeze before suddenly shooting up, red energy crackling around his body like electricity. A fiery red aura surrounded him, growing stronger and brighter with each passing second. The energy surged, intensifying as Izuku stacked the overdrive quirk over and over again. The aura expanded, crackling with raw power until it reached its peak. Overdrive times 14. Izuku's eyes snapped open, glowing with determination. His body trembled under the strain of the quirk, his muscles screaming in protest. Stacking overdrive 14 times was far beyond his limit. The pressure on his body was immense, and within seconds, he heard it, the sharp crack of bones breaking. His eyes widened as a wave of pain shot through his legs, then his arms, then his ribs. Every bone in his body seemed to snap under the strain, and his knees buckled, sending him crashing to the ground. "Ark!" He groaned, his body racked with pain. But he didn't fall unconscious. He didn't stop. The moment his bones broke, they were already mending themselves. Infinite regeneration kicked in, healing his injuries almost as fast as they occurred. It was a brutal process, one that left Izuku's body in a constant CYCL of breaking and healing. "Keep going," he grunted, pushing himself back to his feet. "This is nothing." The pain was excruciating, but Izuku forced himself to endure it. He had no choice. If he didn't break his limits here and now, he would never be ready for you, A. With a deep breath, he activated another quirk, hellflame. Flames erupted around his body, first glowing red and orange, then quickly shifting to blue as the intensity grew. The heat was overwhelming, and Izuku could feel his skin sizzling, the flames burning through his flesh. "More, I need more." He pushed the flames harder, increasing their intensity until they were roaring around him, blue and white, devouring his skin and revealing his bones underneath. His infinite regeneration struggled to keep up, mending his body as fast as the flames destroyed it. Izuku's breathing grew ragged as the pain intensified, but he refused to stop. He needed this. He He needed to be stronger. Then, with a swift motion, he activated his telekinesis. The familiar green aura surrounded him, and he reached out with his mind, grabbing hold of the massive piles of scrap metal and debris around him. The objects trembled as he tried to lift them, but his control faltered. His telekinetic grip wasn't strong enough. Not yet. But that wasn't the point. He wasn't trying to lift the debris. He was trying to push his proficiency. He gritted his teeth and pushed harder, his aura crackling as the debris wobbled in the air, threatening to fall back to the ground. "System," Izuku shouted, sweat pouring down his face. He heard the familiar sound of notifications flooding his mind, alerting him to the rapid increase in his proficiency. The numbers were low, but they were increasing fast. Each second he pushed his limits, his quirks grew stronger, more refined. The pain was unbearable, but Izuku welcomed it. This was what he needed. But it wasn't over yet. With a final burst of energy, he activated gravity manipulation. The force around him shifted, and he felt the gravity around his body intensify. He cranked it up to 8 times the normal force, and his body immediately began to give out. His bones cracked under the pressure, and he collapsed to the ground, screaming in pain. Arg! Once again, infinite regeneration saved him, mending his bones and healing his muscles. But the pain didn't stop. The weight of the gravity was crushing, and every inch of his body screamed for relief. But Izuku didn't stop. He couldn't. He wouldn't. He had to go beyond. Minutes passed, then hours. His body broke and healed over and over again. The CYCL continuing relentlessly as Izuku forced himself to push harder, to break his limits, to reach new heights. His flames burned hotter, his telekinesis grew stronger, his control over gravity became more precise. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Izuku collapsed to the ground, his body completely spent. His chest heaved with exhaustion, and his mind was foggy with pain. But he smiled. He had done it. He had gone beyond his limits. The morning light spilled across Mizudafa Beach, the sun casting a golden glow over the now pristine sand. Izuku stood alone, gazing out at the ocean, reflecting on the transformation not just of the beach, but of himself. Over 2 years of relentless, silent training had led him to this moment, and the calm before the storm only sharpened his focus. His muscles ached in memory of the countless nights spent testing his limits, pushing until he collapsed, only to rise again, mended by his regeneration. Releasing a slow breath, Izuku activated his status window. It was simple, efficient, and to him, the best measure of his progress. Status window quirk. Mimic mastery, SSS plus, proficiency. 100% quirk. Telekinesis, S+, proficiency, 47% quirk. Hellflame, S, proficiency, 46% quirk. Overdrive, A+, proficiency, 48% quirk. Gravity manipulation, A, proficiency, 45% quirk. Infinite regeneration, SS+, proficiency. 50%. He'd clawed his way to these levels through countless setbacks, his progress a testament to his unyielding DSPLN. As his mind absorbed these numbers, Izuku felt an uncommon pang of satisfaction, a subtle nod to the countless hours spent perfecting each quirk, layering their powers together to make himself stronger, faster, and more resilient. This was his silent triumph. His phone buzzed, drawing him back. Checking the time, he realized the UA exam was about to begin, and he needed to move. In a blink, he turned and sprinted toward the school, his determination clear with every step. Halfway to UA, he spotted Kaido waiting by the edge of a park, a grin breaking across his face as Izuku approached. They clasped hands, the energy between them as charged as their shared history of hard-fought training. "You ready?" Kaido asked, eyes shining with excitement. Izuku nodded, feeling a rare warmth in the connection. More than ready. As they neared UA, the massive structure loomed overhead, its glass walls gleaming in the morning sun. The quiet they shared in that moment was one of understanding, Two friends at the beginning of a road they'd worked so long to reach. Just as they were about to step forward, a spiky blonde-haired stormed past. "Out of my way, losers," he sneered, throwing them a dismissive glance. Izuku raised an eyebrow, glancing sideways at Kaido. "Does he have anger issues?" "Seems like it," Kaido replied, the two exchanging a smirk. Together, they continued on, undeterred by the rush of people around them. In the auditorium, the energy in the auditorium was tense and palpable. Hundreds of aspiring heroes sat quietly, their faces a mixture of excitement, nerves, and quiet focus. Present Mick's booming voice echoed through the vast hall, attempting to hype the crowd. "Welcome to today's live performance. Everybody say hey." Silence. Izuku and Kaido shared a quick smile at the awkwardness, thinking how strange it must feel to get no reaction. Mike continued with gusto, explaining the practical exam structure. A simulated city, 10 minutes to score as many points as possible by defeating robotic villains of varying difficulty. A fourth robot, massive, powerful, and worth no points, would appear only as an obstacle to be avoided. "That's all from me," Mike shouted, motioning towards the doors. "Head to your assigned locations." As Izuku walked out, the air buzzed with a tense anticipation. At exam site arriving at his site, Izuku stood before a towering, closed gate, the crowd of examinees around him restless, their breaths tight with anticipation. His eyes scanned his competition, quietly assessing the quirks he could glimpse in action, but none seemed to draw his attention. They were all strong, yes, but he was built for efficiency and power on a level they couldn't even imagine. The gate opened with a deafening clang, and Present Mick's voice boomed from above. "Start." Most participants hesitated for a second, as though waiting for a countdown, but Izuku didn't need an invitation. Activating telekinesis as a faint green aura surrounded him, he layered it with overdrive. Cloaked by telekinesis, the intense energy from overdrive hummed beneath, a near-invisible power waiting to explode. In an instant, Izuku shot forward, his speed blinding as he cut through the crowd, leaving them far behind. The moment he entered the mock city, his eyes sharpened, calculating. A three-pointer robot loomed into view, and with a deliberate flick of his wrist, Izuku activated gravity manipulation around his fist, channeling the weight into a single point. He launched himself at the robot with staggering force, his fist connecting with a shattering blow that echoed across the battlefield. The robot's upper half was obliterated in an instant, the pieces flying backward, the shockwave blasting down the street as nearby robots were pushed back like toys. A faint tremor rippled through the ground, and examinees a block away glanced back in awe and confusion. Izuku straightened, breathing steady, watching as the dust settled. To those who witnessed it, it might have seemed he'd used only telekinesis, but they had no idea of the intricate balance of quirks he'd woven into that single strike. He moved with lethal efficiency, finding one target after another. Another robot, a two-pointer this time, rushed toward him. Without pausing, he extended his hand, and under the crushing force of his telekinesis, the machine crumpled as though it were made of paper, its steel frame collapsing in on itself. To the onlookers, it looked as if the robot had folded from a simple gesture, his power both terrifying and awe-inspiring. The observer room and the observation room, the exam proctors were glued to their screens. A few students exhibited impressive intelligence, scanning the area strategically for points, and others like Ida relied on sheer speed. One student with a stomach laser annihilated robots in dazzling light displays. But as the proctor's eyes fell on Izuku's screen, they couldn't look away. "There," one whispered, voice barely hiding his awe. "That's raw power and restraint." The feed showed Izuku punching through robots with effortless precision. Each attack was powerful enough to crush a small building. But Izuku controlled it all with an economy of motion that seemed to transcend normal quirk use. With each blow, shock waves pulsed out, causing even spectators on other monitors to turn their heads, catching glimpses of the boy whose strength bent the battlefield around him. Intelligence, tactical efficiency, he's masking more than telekinesis, another murmured. This kid's something else. One proctor smiled and pressed a button on the control panel, labeled Yuruki SWCH. With another robot crushed, Izuku took a moment to check his score. 108. He muttered to himself, satisfied. But then, a faint rumble beneath his feet made him pause. The ground shook, a deep, mechanical grinding filling the air. A shadow stretched across the streets, and Izuku looked up, eyes narrowing as he saw the zero-pointer lumber into view. The machine towered over the cityscape, each step sending tremors through the ground, and with every movement, it tore up the terrain, sending waves of debris crashing around it. Most of the other examinees screamed, running to get out of its path, but Izuku merely tilted his head, watching with a cool detachment. He didn't need to engage, it wouldn't score him any points. And yet, something within him, the need to push himself beyond his limits, drove him forward. He activated hellflame and gravity manipulation simultaneously, cloaking both beneath his telekinetic aura. Flames licked across his body, blending with the faint shimmer of telekinesis. Energy crackled around him, the sheer intensity of his quirks pulsing like an aura of barely contained power. With one sharp intake of breath, he launched himself at the zero-pointer. In a flash, he was a streak of power, flames swirling around him as he punched the machine's metal leg with his full force. The shockwave was unlike anything the other students had ever seen, a blast of energy that flattened nearby structures, tore asphalt from the ground, and sent shards of metal flying. The robot's leg crumpled under his punch, and it staggered, metal screeching as it attempted to maintain balance. But Izuku wasn't done. Leaping up, he aimed another blow at its midsection, this time amplifying his strength by layering hellflame's heat. The air around him sizzled, the metal beneath his fists warping and melting. Each strike pulsed outward, each hit a small explosion of force and fire. The entire field seemed to vibrate with the sheer intensity of his power. Some students watched in awe from a distance, feeling the raw force of his attacks, even from their position. Izuku threw one final punch, channeling everything he had, and the zero-pointer tipped backward, crashing to the ground in a thunderous collapse. Dust and debris filled the air, and Izuku landed smoothly, breathing hard, his heart pounding from the exertion. Even he had to admit, he'd pushed himself to the edge. He looked down at his hands, a rare flicker of satisfaction crossing his face. Back in the observation room, the proctors were silent, eyes wide. That, one finally said, his voice filled with wonder, is beyond anything we've seen in years. As the dust settled around him, Izuku caught a glimpse of the stunned expressions on his fellow examinees' faces. He'd shattered their expectations, showing them a level of power they could only dream of. But to him, this was only the beginning. Thank you for joining us on this journey through What If Deku Had Mimic Mastery Quirk. We hope you found it as captivating as we did. A big thank you to AceFroster for creating such an engaging story. Don't forget to visit their profile on Wattpad for more fantastic works. The link is in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Zenin Fanfics for more intriguing explorations into fanfiction and fantasy. Your support helps us create more content like this, and we love hearing your thoughts and suggestions in the comment section. See you soon in the next video.